My sibling thought they were getting the house. But the deed said no. Jessica, you need to understand that this house will be mine when Grandma Rose passes. Maybe you should start looking for your own place instead of assuming you can just stay here forever. I looked up from the medical textbook I was studying at Grandma's kitchen table, where I'd been reviewing cardiac protocols after my 12-hour shift at St. Mary's. My older brother Marcus stood in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing that familiar expression of smug certainty that had defined our relationship for the past 28 years of my life. I'm not assuming anything, Marcus. I'm just helping take care of her. I kept my voice level, though my heart rate spiked the way it did when I had to deal with hostile family members in the ICU. She's 92 and has diabetes. Someone needs to check her blood sugar and make sure she takes her medications. Right, and I'm sure it has nothing to do with you thinking you'll get something out of it. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, lowering his voice as Grandma Rose's afternoon soap opera played loudly in the living room. Look, Jess, I've already talked to Mom, Uncle Pete, and Aunt Linda about this. We all know how these things work. I'm the eldest son, I make $120,000 a year at the firm, and I can actually afford to maintain this place. You're a nurse pulling in what, maybe 50 grand? Be realistic. The worst part wasn't his condescending tone or even the way he'd somehow turned my career in healthcare into something lesser than his job selling insurance. The worst part was that he genuinely believed what he was saying. For months now, Marcus had been acting like Grandma Rose's 1940s colonial was already his. He'd measured the master bedroom for his king-size bed. He'd promised his twin 8-year-olds, Chloe and Cameron, that they'd each get their own rooms with way cooler wallpaper than the old lady stuff. Last Sunday at Mom's house, I'd overheard him telling his wife Sarah about his plans to convert the sunroom into a home office. Has Grandma Rose actually told you that? I asked, closing my textbook. Because last I checked, she's still very much alive and making her own decisions. Marcus laughed, the same dismissive sound he'd made when I told him I was accepted into nursing school. Come on, Jessica. Look around. This house is worth at least $400,000 now, probably more with the market going crazy. Grandma's not stupid. She knows I'm the one who can keep it in the family, maintain the property value, give her great-grandchildren a stable home. What are you going to do, fill it with your cats? I didn't have cats, but correcting him felt pointless. Marcus had been rewriting reality about me for years. According to family lore that he'd carefully cultivated, I was the irresponsible one who'd never settled down, never bought property, never contributed to family gatherings the way his perfectly coordinated family did with their matching Christmas sweaters and elaborate birthday parties. What he didn't mention were the 3 nights a week I spent here, helping Grandma Rose shower and checking her feet for diabetic ulcers. Or the fact that I'd been managing her medications since her mini-stroke 6 months ago. Or that I was the one who rushed over at 2 a.m. when her medical alert system went off because she'd fallen trying to reach her blood pressure pills. Grandma Rose is lucky to have such a devoted grandson, I said finally. Marcus missed the sarcasm entirely. Exactly. I'm glad you get it. He headed toward the living room, probably to interrupt her stories and remind her about his latest promotion or Chloe's honor roll achievement. I opened my textbook again, but the words blurred together. Something would have to give eventually. That evening, after Marcus left with promises to check in on Grandma more often, something he'd been saying for months without following through, I helped Grandma Rose get ready for bed. Her arthritis had been acting up, making it difficult for her to manage the buttons on her nightgown. That boy of mine still going on about the house, she asked as I helped her settle into her recliner with her evening medications. I paused, unsure how to answer. Grandma Rose had always been sharp, but lately I'd noticed her having more confused moments. Just last week, she'd called me Margaret, her sister who died in 1987. I didn't want to upset her by getting into family drama. He's just planning ahead, I guess. Grandma Rose made a sound that might have been laughter. Planning ahead. That's one way to put it. She looked at me with eyes that seemed suddenly clearer than they'd been in weeks. Jessica, honey, can you do me a favor tomorrow? I need you to drive me to see Harold Weinstock. Your lawyer. I checked her pill organizer, making sure she'd taken her evening doses. Is everything okay? Are you feeling all right? I'm feeling just fine. But there are some things I need to take care of while I still can. She patted my hand with her papery fingers. And don't mention this to Marcus or your mother. Not yet. The next day was my day off, so I picked up Grandma Rose at 10 a.m. sharp. Harold Weinstock's office was in one of those old converted houses downtown, with creaky wooden floors and the smell of coffee that had been brewing since 1962. I'd expected to wait in the lobby, but Grandma Rose insisted I come in with her. Harold, this is my granddaughter Jessica, the nurse I told you about, she said as we settled into worn leather chairs across from his massive oak desk. She's the one who's been taking such good care of me. Mr. Weinstock, who had to be at least 75 himself, smiled warmly. Your grandmother speaks very highly of you, dear. She tells me you've been managing her medical care. Just helping out where I can, I said, confused about why I was in this meeting at all. Well, Rose, I have the documents you requested. He pulled out a manila folder. Everything's been updated according to your instructions. The deed transfer is complete, and I've prepared a new will that reflects your wishes. As we discussed, this supersedes the previous version from 2019. My stomach dropped. So Marcus was right, Grandma Rose was updating her will. I felt sick thinking about the conversation I'd have to have with her about finding my own place. My apartment lease was up in 3 months, and I'd been stupidly hoping I could stay here long enough to save for a decent down payment on something of my own. Now Jessica, Grandma Rose said, I need you to understand something important. This house has been in our family for 63 years. Your grandfather bought it when we were newlyweds, and we raised your father and Uncle Pete here. It's not just about the money or the property value. I nodded, trying to prepare myself for the gentle explanation of why Marcus would be inheriting it instead of me. That's why, she continued, I've decided to leave it to someone who understands what family really means. Someone who shows up not when it's convenient, but when it's needed. Mr. Weinstock slid a document across the desk toward me. My name was on it. I stared at the document, reading my own name 3 times before the words started to make sense. Jessica Marie Chin was typed in neat legal font next to phrases like sole beneficiary and property transfer effective immediately upon death of grantor. I don't understand, I whispered, looking between Grandma Rose and Mr. Weinstock. But Marcus said, everyone thinks. Everyone thinks what Marcus told them to think, Grandma Rose said, her voice carrying a steel I rarely heard. That boy's been planning my funeral since I turned 85. Last month, he brought over paint samples. Paint samples, Jessica. For my living room. Told me the wallpaper was dated and that Sarah had some wonderful ideas for modernizing the place. Mr. Weinstock cleared his throat diplomatically. Your grandmother came to me in March with some concerns about her previous estate planning. She wanted to ensure the house went to someone who would preserve its character and understand its emotional value, not just its market value. March. That was right after Marcus had started talking about knocking down the wall between the kitchen and dining room to create an open concept space. He'd even brought over his contractor friend Dave to give him a quote, walking through Grandma's house like he already owned it while she sat right there in her chair. Grandma, I can't accept this, I said, though my hands were shaking as I held the deed. This house is worth. Marcus said $400,000. That's more money than I'll make in 8 years. And the family will never forgive me if. If what? If you let me decide what to do with my own property. Grandma Rose leaned forward, more animated than I'd seen her in months. Jessica, honey, I've watched that boy count my money since he was 16 years old. When your grandfather died in 2018, Marcus asked me the same day of the funeral if I needed help organizing my finances. The same day, Jessica. I remembered that. I'd found Marcus in Grandpa's study that evening, going through financial documents. When I asked what he was doing, he'd said he was helping Grandma get her affairs in order during her time of grief. I thought it was thoughtful, if a little premature. The final straw was 3 weeks ago, Grandma Rose continued. He brought little Chloe over, and she was so excited about her new room in great-grandma's house. That sweet baby girl was talking about which walls she wanted to paint purple and where she'd put her desk. He's been promising my house to his children like it's already his. Mr. Weinstock shuffled through some papers. There's one more thing, Jessica. Your grandmother has also designated you as her healthcare power of attorney, effective immediately. She's revoked the previous designation. My heart stopped. Marcus was your healthcare proxy. Since 2020, Grandma Rose said grimly. Seemed like a good idea at the time, he's organized, responsible, good with paperwork. But last month when I had that dizzy spell and you wanted me to go to the emergency room, he overruled you. Said it was just anxiety and that hospitals were dangerous for elderly people. You remember. I remembered. I'd wanted to call an ambulance when Grandma Rose couldn't stand up without wobbling, but Marcus had insisted we wait and see because ER visits were expensive and usually unnecessary. She'd been fine, but it had scared me. As a nurse, I knew that wait and see could be fatal for someone her age. Harold, would you mind giving Jessica and me a moment alone? Mr. Weinstock nodded and stepped out, closing the door behind him. Grandma, I started, but she held up her hand. This family has forgotten who I am, Jessica. But you never did. You're the only one who still sees me as Rose Delacroix, not just some old lady waiting to die, Grandma Rose continued, her voice steady but emotional. When you check my blood sugar, you explain what the numbers mean. When Marcus handles my medical stuff, he just tells me what to do like I'm a child. She was right. Just 2 weeks ago, Marcus had scheduled her a cardiology appointment without asking her first, then got irritated when she wanted to know why she needed to see a heart doctor. Just trust the process, Grandma, he'd said. The important thing is staying healthy. He'd spoken about her like she wasn't sitting right there. But the family. I tried again. Mom is going to lose her mind. Uncle Pete, Aunt Linda, they all think Marcus should inherit because he's the oldest son and because that's what Marcus told them to think, Grandma Rose interrupted. Did you know he's been hosting Sunday dinners at his house specifically to discuss my future care needs? Sarah told me last month. They've been meeting every week since January, planning out my final years like I'm some kind of project to manage. My stomach clenched. Marcus had been having family meetings about Grandma Rose without inviting me or even telling me about them. What kind of things are they discussing? Whether I should be moved to assisted living. Whether this house is too much for me to handle. Whether my driving should be restricted. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Sarah mentioned they'd looked into 3 different senior communities. Nice ones, she made sure to say. But Jessica, I'm not ready to give up my independence yet. The pieces started falling into place. Marcus's increased visits lately hadn't been about spending quality time with Grandma Rose, they'd been evaluations. He'd been documenting things, building a case for why she needed more supervision. Last Sunday, I'd caught him taking photos of the loose banister on the front steps and a crack in the kitchen tile. That's why I needed to act quickly, Grandma Rose said. Harold warned me that if Marcus could demonstrate I wasn't capable of making sound decisions about my care, he could petition for guardianship. As my healthcare proxy, he'd have significant influence over those proceedings. The word guardianship hit me like ice water. If Marcus gained legal guardianship, he'd control not just Grandma Rose's medical decisions, but her finances, her living situation, everything. He could sell the house out from under her and move her wherever he thought was best. Has he actually said anything about guardianship? Not directly. But Sarah let it slip that they'd consulted with an elder care attorney about protecting family assets while ensuring I get appropriate supervision. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I thought about all the times recently that Marcus had made comments about Grandma Rose's confusion and memory issues. How he'd started speaking louder around her, as if she were deaf or simple. How he'd begun prefacing conversations with phrases like, now Grandma, try to remember, and let me explain this simply. The thing is, Jessica, I'm not confused about the important things. I know exactly what's happening, and I know who's been here for me these past 2 years. She reached over and squeezed my hand. When I had that reaction to the new blood pressure medication and couldn't stop throwing up, who stayed here all night to monitor my symptoms. That's just what family does, I said quietly. Is it? Because when your mother had her gallbladder surgery last year, did Marcus take 3 days off work to help her? When Uncle Pete's arthritis flared up, did Marcus drive him to physical therapy twice a week for 6 weeks? She was right. Marcus was generous with advice and opinions about what other people should do, but when it came to actual caregiving, the messy, inconvenient, time-consuming work, he was always too busy, too important, or too stressed from his own responsibilities. There's something else, Grandma Rose said, lowering her voice. Last month, Marcus asked me about my life insurance policies. He wanted to know the payout amounts and whether I considered making him the beneficiary instead of splitting it between you kids equally. Said it would be simpler for tax purposes if one person handled the estate. The audacity was breathtaking, but somehow not surprising. Marcus had always been calculating, but this felt different. More urgent. Like he was racing against some kind of deadline. Grandma, when exactly did you change the will? Yesterday, she said with a small, satisfied smile. Harold filed all the paperwork yesterday afternoon. The deed transfer is already complete, legally. You own this house as of 4:47 p.m. on Tuesday, October 15th. The will is just backup documentation. Which meant that when Marcus had stood in this very kitchen yesterday evening, lecturing me about being realistic about my future living situation, he was already wrong. He just didn't know it yet. The drive home from Mr. Weinstock's office was surreal. I kept glancing at the manila folder on my passenger seat, half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. Grandma Rose had been unusually quiet, staring out the window with what looked like relief mixed with anticipation. You're not going to tell Marcus yet, are you? She asked as I pulled into her driveway. I honestly don't know what I'm going to do, I admitted. This is a lot to process. Take your time, honey. But remember, knowledge is power. Sometimes it's worth holding on to that power until you really need it. That evening, I was restocking supplies in the ICU when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, family dinner Sunday at Marcus's. 5 p.m. Sarah's making her famous lasagna. Don't be late this time. I stared at the message, wondering if this was one of the Sunday dinners where they discussed Grandma Rose's care needs without her knowledge. My shift ended at 7 p.m., and I'd been planning to spend Sunday evening helping Grandma Rose organize her medications for the week, but suddenly I was curious about what exactly these family gatherings entailed. I texted back, I'll be there. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I drove to Marcus's pristine suburban colonial. His house was everything Grandma Rose's wasn't, neutral paint colors, granite countertops, no personal history cluttering the surfaces. Sarah answered the door wearing one of her seasonal sweaters, this one decorated with tiny pumpkins. Jessica. We're so glad you could make it, she said, though her smile seemed forced. Everyone's in the living room. Everyone turned out to be Mom, Uncle Pete, Aunt Linda, and Marcus's twins, who were absorbed in their tablets while the adults talked. Marcus was holding court from his leather recliner, gesturing with a glass of wine. The important thing is being proactive, he was saying as I walked in. We can't wait until there's a crisis. Jessica. Mom brightened when she saw me. Perfect timing. We were just discussing Grandma Rose. I settled onto the couch next to Uncle Pete, accepting a glass of wine from Sarah. Oh. What about her? Marcus leaned forward with that familiar expression of patient condescension. We're concerned about her living alone in that big house. Last week when I was there, I noticed she'd forgotten to turn off the stove burner. Just a small thing, but it could have been dangerous. That was interesting, since I'd been there every day last week and hadn't seen any evidence of forgotten burners. What day was this? Thursday, I think. The point is, these little memory lapses add up. Sarah and I have been researching some really nice senior communities. Meadowbrook Manor has an excellent reputation, and they have availability in their assisted living wing. Meadowbrook Manor costs $4,800 a month, Aunt Linda said, looking worried. Does Grandma Rose have that kind of money saved up? Marcus waved dismissively. That's where the house comes in. The market's hot right now, we could probably get $420,000, maybe even $450,000. That would cover her care costs for several years, and frankly, the money would be better invested in ensuring her safety than tied up in property taxes and maintenance costs. My wine glass nearly slipped from my fingers. Marcus wasn't just planning to inherit the house, he was planning to sell it while Grandma Rose was still alive to pay for the assisted living facility he wanted to move her into. Has anyone actually asked Grandma Rose how she feels about moving? I asked carefully. Mom shifted uncomfortably. Well, you know how she is about change. Sometimes family has to make difficult decisions for our loved one's own good. That's exactly right, Marcus said, warming to his favorite topic. Look, I have power of attorney for her healthcare decisions. I've been monitoring her condition closely, and there are definite signs of cognitive decline. Confusion, forgetfulness, difficulty managing her medications properly. I help her with medications, I interjected. Her blood sugar's been stable for months, and she hasn't missed a single dose of anything important. Right, but you're not there 24/7, Marcus said smoothly. And with your work schedule, you can't provide the level of supervision she really needs. That's not criticism, Jess, it's just reality. You're single, you work 12-hour shifts, you can't be expected to be a full-time caregiver. The conversation continued around me, but I was barely listening. Marcus had orchestrated this entire narrative. He'd positioned himself as the responsible decision-maker, framed Grandma Rose's independence as dangerous, and convinced the family that selling her house was not only necessary but noble. When were you thinking of approaching her about this? Uncle Pete asked. Soon, Marcus said. I want to have all the paperwork ready, the real estate agent lined up, the Meadowbrook application completed, everything organized so it's as smooth as possible for her. Probably after Thanksgiving. Give her the holidays in her own place, then help her transition to something more appropriate for her needs. Sarah nodded supportively. The twins are so excited about having their great-grandmother closer to us. Meadowbrook is only 15 minutes away, so we could visit much more often. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead I stepped outside onto Marcus's back deck and called Grandma Rose. How's the family dinner, honey? She answered on the second ring. Educational, I said quietly. Grandma, we need to talk. Soon. When I got back to Grandma Rose's house that night, I found her waiting in her recliner with a cup of tea and an expression I'd never seen before, something between determination and mischief. "So," she said without preamble, "how was Marcus's little war council?" I sank onto the couch across from her, still processing everything I'd heard. "You knew what those dinners were really about." "Harold Weinstock isn't my only source of information, honey. Your Aunt Linda called me Tuesday night, bless her heart. She was worried about the costs of this Meadowbrook place and wanted to make sure I had adequate savings for what Marcus was planning." Grandma Rose's laugh was dry. "Adequate savings? As if I haven't been managing my own finances for 70 years. Grandma, they're talking about having you declared incompetent. Marcus thinks he can use his healthcare power of attorney to." "His former healthcare power of attorney," she corrected. "Remember? Harold switched that over to you on Tuesday. But Marcus doesn't know that yet, does he?" A chill ran down my spine. "What happens when he finds out?" "Well, that depends on how we handle this." She set down her tea and leaned forward. "Jessica, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about the house anymore. If Marcus succeeds in getting guardianship, he'll control everything, my bank accounts, my medical decisions, where I live, who I can see. He could isolate me completely." The weight of what she was saying settled over me. This wasn't just about inheritance or family drama. This was about Grandma Rose's fundamental freedom. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to let Marcus keep planning his little takeover. Let him get his paperwork ready, line up his real estate agent, submit that application to Meadowbrook Manor. Let him think he's winning." "Why?" Her eyes sparkled with something that reminded me of the sharp, formidable woman who'd raised 2 sons and buried 3 brothers. "Because sometimes the best way to expose someone's true nature is to give them enough rope to hang themselves with." Over the next week, I watched Marcus accelerate his plans with an efficiency that was both impressive and horrifying. He'd taken 2 personal days from work to handle family business, which apparently meant meeting with elder care attorney Patricia Hoffman about guardianship procedures and getting a formal property appraisal from Keller Williams. The appraisal was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m., something I only knew because Marcus had texted me Wednesday night, FYI, having the house appraised Friday morning. Part of financial planning for Grandma's future care. Might want to make sure she's dressed appropriately when they come. The condescension in that message was stunning. As if Grandma Rose was some confused invalid who might answer the door naked instead of a woman who'd been maintaining her appearance and dignity just fine for 9 decades. "He didn't ask permission, did he?" Grandma Rose said when I showed her the text. "Doesn't look like it. Should I tell him to cancel?" "Absolutely not. Let him have his appraisal." She smiled in a way that made me slightly nervous. "I have a feeling that $450,000 estimate is going to be very important for his Meadowbrook application. It would be a shame to deprive him of that information." Friday morning arrived crisp and clear. I'd arranged to work a half shift so I could be there when the appraiser came, not to interfere, but to observe. Marcus arrived at 9:45 a.m. sharp, wearing his best suit and carrying a leather portfolio that probably contained financial projections and care facility brochures. "Jessica, good, you're here," he said, as if he'd invited me. "When Mr. Patterson arrives, let me do the talking. I understand the financial implications better, and we want to make sure the appraisal reflects the property's true market value." "Of course," I said mildly. "I'm just here to help Grandma Rose if she has any questions." "Right. And Grandma," Marcus turned to her with that loud, slow voice he'd been using lately, "this gentleman is going to walk through your house and take some measurements. It's all part of making sure you have enough money for your future care. Do you understand?" Grandma Rose looked at him with perfect clarity. "I understand exactly what's happening, Marcus." When David Patterson from Keller Williams arrived, Marcus immediately launched into host mode, shaking hands and guiding the conversation like he owned the place. Which, in his mind, he practically did. "The property's been in our family since 1960, Marcus explained as they walked through the living room. Excellent bones, original hardwood floors, and as you can see, it's been very well maintained. My grandmother has taken excellent care of it." What he didn't mention was that most of that excellent care had been provided by the cleaning service I'd arranged and paid for, or the handyman I'd been calling whenever something needed repair. As Mr. Patterson measured and photographed, Marcus kept up a steady stream of commentary about the house's incredible potential and prime location. He pointed out the spacious rooms, the mature landscaping, the updated electrical system, speaking about it all with the pride of ownership. Grandma Rose sat quietly in her chair, watching everything with those sharp eyes. When Mr. Patterson asked her a direct question about the house's history, Marcus tried to answer for her. "Actually," Grandma Rose said firmly, "I can speak for myself, thank you." The appraisal took 90 minutes. When it was finished, Mr. Patterson shook hands with Marcus and promised to have the written report ready by Monday. "I think we can safely estimate somewhere in the $440,000 to $460,000 range," he told Marcus confidentially. "Beautiful property. Your grandmother should be very proud." After he left, Marcus was practically glowing. He spent 20 minutes explaining to Grandma Rose how this appraisal was wonderful news for her financial security and how the proceeds from the house would ensure she could afford the very best care available. He was so focused on his victory that he completely missed the look that passed between Grandma Rose and me. On Monday morning, Marcus called me at work, breathless with excitement. "Jessica, the appraisal came in at $455,000. I've already submitted Grandma's application to Meadowbrook Manor, and Patricia Hoffman thinks we have an excellent case for guardianship if Grandma resists the transition. Everything's falling into place perfectly." "That's great, Marcus," I said, watching my ICU patient's heart monitor while my own pulse spiked. "When are you planning to tell her about Meadowbrook?" "This weekend. I want to present it as a positive choice rather than a necessity. Sarah's found some beautiful photos of their dining room and activity center. We'll make it sound exciting." After I hung up, I sat in the hospital break room staring at my phone, thinking about Grandma Rose's words. Sometimes the best way to expose someone's true nature is to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. Marcus had just woven himself a very long rope indeed. Saturday afternoon, Marcus called an emergency family meeting at Grandma Rose's house. I arrived to find Mom, Uncle Pete, and Aunt Linda already seated around the kitchen table, with Sarah setting out coffee cups like this was some kind of celebration. Marcus had spread glossy brochures across the table, Meadowbrook Manor's marketing materials featuring silver-haired models playing chess and tending gardens. Now that we have the official appraisal, Marcus began, his insurance salesman voice in full effect, we can move forward with getting Grandma the care she deserves. Grandma Rose sat in her usual chair, hands folded, watching him with an expression I couldn't quite read. She'd been unusually quiet all morning, asking me twice to double-check that her important papers were still in the lockbox upstairs. The timing is actually perfect, Marcus continued, pulling out a manila folder. Meadowbrook has an opening in their assisted living wing starting December 1st. The monthly fee is $4,200, which sounds expensive, but when you break down everything that's included, meals, housekeeping, medication management, 24-hour nursing staff, it's actually quite reasonable. Marcus, Uncle Pete interrupted, are you sure Rose wants to move? She seems perfectly fine here. That's exactly the problem, Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious. She seems fine, but there are signs of decline that aren't obvious unless you know what to look for. As someone with healthcare power of attorney, I have a responsibility to make decisions based on medical reality, not just what she wants in the moment. I nearly choked on my coffee. The healthcare power of attorney he no longer had. Sarah opened one of the brochures. Look at these beautiful common areas, Grandma Rose. And they have a library, and bridge tournaments every Wednesday. You'd make so many new friends. The best part, Marcus added, is that selling the house will give you complete financial security. After we pay off your remaining mortgage balance, about $47,000, and cover the real estate fees, you'll clear roughly $395,000. Invested conservatively, that's enough to cover Meadowbrook's fees for 15 to 20 years, depending on market performance. Aunt Linda looked concerned. But what if she lives longer than 20 years? Well, that's where Medicaid planning comes into play, Marcus said smoothly. Patricia Hoffman has explained the 5-year look-back period for asset transfers. The important thing is positioning everything legally to protect the family's interests while ensuring Rose gets appropriate care. The casual way he discussed planning around Grandma Rose's death, right in front of her, made my stomach turn. But what made it worse was how the rest of the family nodded along, as if Marcus was handling some unpleasant but necessary business transaction. When exactly were you thinking of listing the house? Mom asked. I've already contacted Janet Morrison at Keller Williams. She's the agent who sold the Henderson place down the street for $20,000 over asking. She can have it on the market by November 15th if we move quickly. Marcus turned to Grandma Rose with that patronizing smile. Grandma, I know this feels overwhelming, but I promise Sarah and I will handle every detail. You won't have to worry about anything. Grandma Rose spoke for the first time in 20 minutes, her voice steady and clear. Marcus, dear, I have a question about this healthcare power of attorney you keep mentioning. Of course, Grandma. What would you like to know? When exactly do you think you received that authority? Marcus looked confused by the question. You signed the papers in 2020, remember? Right after your mini-stroke. We discussed how important it was to have someone who could make medical decisions if you weren't able to. I remember signing those papers, Grandma Rose said carefully. But I'm curious, did you know that power of attorney documents can be revoked at any time, as long as the person is mentally competent? The room went completely silent. Marcus's confident expression faltered slightly. Well, yes, technically, but Grandma, you appointed me because you trusted my judgment. And given some of the concerning behaviors I've observed lately, I think it's important that we stick with the plan. Grandma Rose smiled, and something in that smile made me sit up straighter. What concerning behaviors would those be, exactly? Marcus's face went through several shades of red as he realized he'd walked directly into Grandma Rose's trap. The confident insurance salesman demeanor cracked, replaced by something desperate and scrambling. Well, there was the incident with the stove burner I mentioned, he said, his voice less steady now. And last month you seemed confused about what day it was when I called. Plus, you've been having trouble managing your medications properly. Marcus, I interrupted, unable to stay quiet any longer. Grandma Rose hasn't missed a single medication dose in 6 months. I have the logs to prove it. And I've been here every day this week. When exactly did this stove incident happen? I don't need you undermining my authority here, Jessica, Marcus snapped, his composure completely gone now. This is exactly the kind of interference that makes managing Grandma's care so difficult. Uncle Pete looked uncomfortable. Marcus, maybe we should slow down a bit. If Rose doesn't want to move. What Rose wants isn't the issue anymore, Marcus said, his voice rising. I have legal authority to make these decisions. Dr. Patterson at Meadowbrook specifically told me that families often have to override their elderly relatives' wishes for their own safety. Dr. Patterson? Grandma Rose asked innocently. You mean you've already spoken to doctors at Meadowbrook about admitting me? Before asking my permission. Sarah jumped in, clearly trying to salvage the situation. We just wanted to have all the information ready, Grandma Rose. We thought you'd appreciate not having to worry about the details. How thoughtful. Grandma Rose stood up slowly, steadying herself with her cane. Marcus, would you mind getting my lockbox from upstairs? The small gray one in my bedroom closet. Top shelf. Grandma, we don't need to look at old paperwork right now, Marcus said impatiently. We need to focus on making these decisions while we still have time to do everything properly. Oh, but I think my paperwork is very relevant to this conversation. Her voice carried an authority I hadn't heard in years. Jessica, dear, would you mind helping me get the box? When we came back downstairs with the lockbox, Marcus was pacing behind his chair, talking rapidly on his phone. I caught fragments. Yes, Patricia, we might need to accelerate the timeline. And, signs of increasing agitation and possible paranoia. Grandma Rose set the lockbox on the table with a decisive thunk that made everyone jump. She pulled out a small key from her sweater pocket and opened it deliberately, removing several official-looking documents. Marcus, you seem very confident about your legal authority over my medical decisions, she said, spreading the papers on the table over his Meadowbrook brochures. Would you like to explain to everyone here what healthcare power of attorney means? Marcus hung up his phone, irritation flashing across his face. It means I have the legal right to make medical decisions when you're not capable of making them yourself. Which, frankly, your behavior today suggests might already be the case. Interesting interpretation. Grandma Rose slid one of the documents toward him. This is a revocation of power of attorney, filed with Harold Weinstock's office on Tuesday, October 15th at 4:30 p.m. Your authority over my medical decisions was terminated 5 days ago. The color drained from Marcus's face as he stared at the document. You can't just. Grandma, you don't understand the implications of what you're doing. I understand perfectly. I also understand that you've been telling people I'm mentally incompetent while simultaneously planning to profit from selling my house without my consent. She pulled out another document. This is particularly interesting, your signed application to Meadowbrook Manor, dated yesterday. Note the section where you've indicated that you have full financial and medical power of attorney and that the patient is unable to make informed decisions about her care needs. Mom gasped. Marcus, you told them she was incompetent. It's a legal formality, Marcus said desperately. These facilities require certain language to process applications efficiently. No, Grandma Rose said firmly. It's fraud. You've made false statements about my mental capacity to a medical facility while planning to sell my property based on authority you don't actually possess. The room erupted in chaos. Uncle Pete was demanding explanations, Aunt Linda was crying, and Sarah was frantically trying to shush the twins, who had wandered in from the living room drawn by the shouting. But I was watching Marcus, seeing him realize that his carefully constructed plan was collapsing in real time. And we hadn't even gotten to the house yet. Marcus's face had gone from red to white to an alarming shade of gray as he stared at the revocation papers. His hands were actually shaking as he picked up the document, reading it over and over like the words might change. This doesn't mean anything, he said finally, his voice pitched higher than normal. Patricia Hoffman specifically told me that power of attorney revocations can be challenged if there's evidence of diminished capacity or undue influence. He looked directly at me. And it's pretty obvious who's been influencing these decisions. Undue influence. I stood up, my own anger finally breaking through. You mean like having secret family meetings to plan someone's life without including them? Or lying to medical facilities about their mental state? Or promising your children bedrooms in a house that doesn't belong to you? That house has been in our family for 60 years, Marcus shot back. I'm trying to preserve family assets and ensure Grandma gets proper care. What are you trying to do, Jessica? Move in here permanently so you don't have to pay rent. The accusation hit exactly where he'd intended. I felt Uncle Pete and Aunt Linda's eyes on me, saw doubt creep across Mom's face. Marcus had always been skilled at flipping scripts, making his own selfishness look like noble concern while painting everyone else's motives as suspicious. That's enough, Grandma Rose said sharply. Marcus, sit down. Everyone, sit down. We're not finished. Something in her tone made even Marcus comply, though he looked like he was ready to bolt for the door. Since we're discussing the house, Grandma Rose continued, reaching into the lockbox again, I suppose now is as good a time as any to clear up some confusion about ownership. She pulled out a thick document with a blue legal backing, the kind used for property deeds. My heart started hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Marcus, you've been very thorough in your planning. That appraisal for $455,000 was quite detailed. And I appreciate you taking the time to research real estate agents and market conditions. She smoothed the deed document on the table. Unfortunately, there's been a small oversight in your research. What kind of oversight? Marcus asked warily. Well, you've been making plans to sell property that doesn't actually belong to you. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's coffee cup clinked against her saucer. Outside, a lawn-mower started up in someone's yard, the sound absurdly normal against the tension in the room. Of course it belongs to me, Marcus said slowly. I mean, it will belong to me. You're leaving me the house, Grandma. We've discussed this. Everyone knows. Everyone knows what you told them to know, Grandma Rose interrupted. But what you told them and what I actually decided are two very different things. She slid the deed across the table. From where I sat, I could see Marcus's eyes scanning the document, his face growing more confused and then horrified as he processed what he was reading. This says. He started, then stopped, reading again. This says Jessica owns the house. Effective October 15th at 4:47 p.m., Grandma Rose confirmed. Same day I revoked your power of attorney, actually. Quite a productive afternoon. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. Marcus shot up from his chair so fast it toppled backwards, the crash making Sarah shriek and Chloe start crying. Are you out of your goddamn mind? Marcus screamed, all pretense of respectful concern evaporating instantly. Jessica doesn't deserve this house. She's never contributed anything to this family. She's manipulated you into giving her a $500,000 gift while the rest of us get nothing. Marcus. Mom gasped, but he was beyond caring about appearances now. No, I'm not going to pretend this is okay. He whirled on me, his face twisted with rage. You calculated little bitch. You moved in here and played nursemaid just long enough to steal my inheritance. My kids were supposed to grow up in this house. Your kids. I found my voice, standing to face him. Marcus, this was never your house. You counted Grandma Rose's money before Grandpa was even buried. I'm the oldest son. I'm the one with a family, with responsibilities, with the means to maintain this property. Spittle flew from his mouth as he yelled. What are you going to do with it? Fill it with your sad single-woman cat lady bullshit. Marcus, stop it right now, Uncle Pete commanded, but Marcus was too far gone to hear him. I've already put a deposit down at Meadowbrook. I've promised my children their own rooms. I've made commitments based on what any reasonable person would expect. He grabbed the deed, crumpling it in his fist. This is elder abuse, and I'm going to prove it. Patricia Hoffman will have this overturned in a week. That's when Grandma Rose started laughing. It wasn't a gentle, grandmotherly chuckle. It was the sharp, delighted laugh of someone watching their carefully laid trap snap shut with perfect precision. Oh, Marcus, Grandma Rose said, wiping tears from her eyes, you think Patricia Hoffman is going to help you overturn this deed? Marcus was still clutching the crumpled paper, his chest heaving. Damn right she is. This whole thing reeks of manipulation and coercion. No competent 92-year-old gives away a $500,000 house to. Patricia Hoffman is the one who recommended I transfer the deed immediately, Grandma Rose interrupted, her voice cutting through his rant like a blade. 3 weeks ago, when you consulted with her about guardianship procedures. The room went dead silent except for Chloe's sniffling. What? Marcus whispered. Did you really think attorney-client privilege works one way, dear? Patricia called me the day after your consultation. Apparently, when someone comes in asking about how to gain control over an elderly person's assets, competent attorneys have an ethical obligation to inform that person of their rights. Grandma Rose's smile was razor-sharp. She's been my legal counsel for this entire process. I watched Marcus's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as he realized what had happened. You mean, she's been working for you this whole time? Patricia Hoffman has been my attorney for 15 years, Marcus. Did you honestly think I'd let a stranger handle my estate planning? Grandma Rose pulled another document from the lockbox. This is her bill for services rendered in October. Notice the date she began work on asset protection strategies, October 2nd. 2 days before your first consultation with her. Sarah made a strangled noise. Marcus, you told me she was helping you with guardianship papers. She was. She explained the whole process, gave me forms to fill out, told me exactly what documentation I'd need. Marcus stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening as understanding finally dawned. She gave you enough rope to hang yourself with, I said quietly, remembering Grandma Rose's exact words from weeks ago. Every form you filled out, every false statement you made about Grandma's mental capacity, every plan you shared about selling her house without consent, Patricia documented all of it, Grandma Rose continued. Including your request for expedited guardianship based on financial exploitation by other family members. That was a particularly nice touch. Marcus sank into his chair, the deed still crumpled in his fist. But she told me I had a strong case. She told you exactly what you wanted to hear while gathering evidence of your actual intentions, Grandma Rose said matter-of-factly. Did you know that planning to sell an elderly person's property based on fraudulent power of attorney documents is considered financial elder abuse? Patricia was very thorough in explaining the legal implications. Mom found her voice first. Marcus, please tell me you didn't actually commit fraud. I didn't commit anything. Marcus exploded again, but his voice cracked. Everything I did was legal consultation. I was trying to protect family assets. By lying about Grandma's competency to Meadowbrook Manor. Uncle Pete pulled out his reading glasses and picked up the application Marcus had been so proud of earlier. This says she requires full-time supervision due to advancing dementia and inability to make rational decisions. Marcus, I had lunch with her yesterday. She balanced her checkbook while we talked about the election. The walls were closing in, and Marcus knew it. He looked around the room desperately, searching for allies, but found only horrified family members staring at him like they were seeing him clearly for the first time. Fine, he said, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. You want to play games, Grandma? Two can play. I'm calling Adult Protective Services tomorrow morning. We'll see what they think about sudden property transfers and mysterious power of attorney changes. And Jessica? He turned to me with pure venom. I hope you're ready for a very long, very expensive legal battle. Because this isn't over. He stormed out, Sarah scrambling after him with the twins, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence. That's when Grandma Rose pulled out the final document. Actually, Marcus, she called after him, though he was already gone, you might want to see this first. The front door slammed so hard it rattled the windows, but Grandma Rose seemed completely unfazed. She was still holding that final document, studying it with the satisfied expression of someone saving the best for last. What is that? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Insurance, Grandma Rose said simply, smoothing the paper on the table where Marcus's crumpled Meadowbrook brochures still lay scattered. Patricia suggested I might need it, given Marcus's temperament. I leaned closer to read the header, Affidavit of Competency, Rose Marie Delacroix, October 10, 2024. 3 days before you changed the deed, I realized. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, the geriatrician at St. Mary's, conducted a full cognitive assessment. 2 hours of testing, memory, reasoning, decision-making capacity, understanding of financial concepts. Grandma Rose's finger traced down the document. Perfect scores across the board. Dr. Hawthorne was quite impressed, actually. Said my cognitive function was better than most 70-year-olds she sees. Uncle Pete picked up the affidavit, his insurance background making him naturally drawn to documentation. Rose, this is incredibly thorough. Mini-mental state examination, clock drawing test, financial competency evaluation. When did you have time to do all this? Last Thursday morning. Jessica drove me to what she thought was a routine cardiology follow-up. Grandma Rose winked at me. Sorry for the deception, honey, but I needed a witness who wasn't involved in the estate planning. Dr. Hawthorne specifically noted that you seemed surprised by the testing, which actually strengthened the validity. My mind was reeling. While Marcus had been measuring bedrooms and researching real estate agents, Grandma Rose had been 3 steps ahead, building an unshakable legal foundation for every decision she'd made. But why go through all this? Aunt Linda asked, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. If you wanted Jessica to have the house, why not just tell Marcus from the beginning? Because then I never would have known who he really was, Grandma Rose said sadly. I suspected, especially after he started those Sunday planning sessions. But I needed to see how far he'd go. Whether he'd actually lie about my mental state to get what he wanted. The weight of what had just happened was starting to sink in. Marcus hadn't just been planning to inherit the house, he'd been actively working to have Grandma Rose declared incompetent so he could control every aspect of her life. The Meadowbrook application was the final straw, she continued. When Patricia showed me what he'd written about my supposed dementia and inability to make rational decisions, I knew I'd made the right choice. Mom was staring at the affidavit like it might disappear. I can't believe Marcus would lie like that. His own grandmother. Money changes people, Uncle Pete said grimly. I've seen it in my clients' families when life insurance payouts are involved. But this feels different. More calculated. He's been planning this since Grandpa died, I said, remembering all the small signs I'd missed or dismissed. The Sunday dinners, the healthcare power of attorney, even moving closer to Grandma Rose last year. It was all about positioning himself as the obvious heir. Grandma Rose nodded. And it might have worked, if he'd just been patient. If he'd actually cared about my well-being instead of my bank account. She looked directly at me. But you never once asked about the house, Jessica. Not once in 2 years of helping me shower and checking my blood sugar and driving me to appointments. You never even asked about my will. She was right. The thought of inheritance had honestly never crossed my mind. I'd helped because she needed help, because she was my grandmother, because it was the right thing to do. Now Marcus is going to make good on his threat, I said, anxiety creeping into my voice. Adult protective services, legal challenges, he's not going to just walk away from $500,000. Grandma Rose's smile turned predatory. Oh, I'm counting on it. The next morning, I was barely through the door of my apartment when my phone started ringing. Marcus's name flashed on the screen, and against my better judgment, I answered. Jessica. His voice was eerily calm, nothing like the screaming man who'd stormed out yesterday. We need to talk. I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus. Oh, but I think it is. See, I spent last night doing some research. Did you know that healthcare workers who isolate elderly patients from their families can face criminal charges? It's called exploitation of a vulnerable adult. My stomach dropped. I never isolated Grandma Rose from anyone. Really? Because I have phone records showing that my calls to her house have decreased by 60% since you started helping with her care. I have documentation that you've been present during every major medical decision for the past 6 months. And I have witnesses who can testify that you actively discouraged family involvement in her healthcare. That's not true, and you know it. Truth is subjective, Jessica. What matters is what I can prove in court. His voice carried the same smooth confidence he used with insurance clients. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to convince Grandma Rose to transfer that deed back to the family estate, distributed according to the original will. In exchange, I won't file elder abuse charges against you. You can't be serious. I spoke with a different attorney this morning. Turns out Patricia Hoffman has a conflict of interest that invalidates everything she's done for Grandma Rose. When your attorney is secretly working against you while pretending to provide counsel, it's called legal malpractice. Everything she touched is going to get thrown out. My hands were shaking. Marcus, Grandma Rose made her own decisions. She had a competency evaluation. Arranged by her healthcare proxy, Marcus interrupted smoothly. You. The same person who stands to benefit from a $500,000 property transfer. Any judge is going to see that as suspicious. After I hung up, I drove straight to Grandma Rose's house, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. I found her in the kitchen making tea, looking remarkably serene for someone whose grandson had just declared war on her family. He called you too, didn't he? She said without looking up. How did you know? Because Marcus is predictable. He's probably called your mother, Uncle Pete, maybe even your supervisor at the hospital by now. She poured hot water into her teacup with steady hands. What exactly did he threaten you with? I told her about the elder abuse allegations, the legal malpractice claims, the demand that she reverse the deed transfer. With each detail, Grandma Rose's smile grew wider. Oh, that boy, she said, settling into her chair. He really doesn't know when to quit. Grandma, this isn't funny. He could actually cause problems for me at work. If the hospital thinks I've been exploiting patients' families. I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Maybe I should just walk away. Give him the house. It's not worth destroying both our lives. Jessica Marie Chin, Grandma Rose said sharply, look at me. I met her eyes, seeing steel there that reminded me why she'd survived the depression, buried 3 brothers, and raised 2 sons mostly alone. That house represents 64 years of my life. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every Christmas morning, every family dinner. Do you really think I'm going to let Marcus bully me into handing it over to him after what he's tried to do? But what if he's right about the legal challenges? Then we'll find out together. She reached over and patted my hand. Besides, Marcus made one crucial mistake in his research last night. What's that? Her eyes sparkled with mischief. He assumed Patricia Hoffman was the only attorney I've been working with. That afternoon, Grandma Rose insisted we drive to another part of town I'd never seen her visit before, a modern glass building that housed the law offices of Chin, Martinez and Associates. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. Jessica, I'd like you to meet David Chin, Grandma Rose said as we were ushered into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. No relation, despite the name, but he's been handling some additional legal work for me. David Chen looked to be in his 40s, with the quiet confidence of someone who'd built his practice on competence rather than flash. He shook my hand warmly before settling behind his desk with a thick file folder. Your grandmother has been very thorough in preparing for this situation, he said, opening the folder. Patricia Hoffman handled the estate and competency documentation, but she referred Mrs. Delacroix to me for what we might call defensive measures. Defensive measures? I asked. When someone is planning to challenge your mental competency in order to gain control of your assets, it's wise to document their actual behavior, Grandma Rose explained. David, show her the recordings. My heart stopped. Recordings? David pulled out a small digital device I recognized as the voice recorder Grandma Rose had claimed was for keeping track of her doctor's instructions. Your grandmother has been documenting her interactions with Marcus since September 15th. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state, so these recordings are completely legal. He pressed play, and Marcus's voice filled the office. Grandma, you have to understand that managing your finances is getting too complicated for you. Let me set up a joint checking account so I can handle the bills when you start forgetting things. The date stamp showed this conversation had happened 3 weeks ago. I remembered that day. I'd been there doing laundry when Marcus arrived, but I'd been in the basement and had missed their conversation entirely. There are 47 recordings total, David continued, documenting Marcus's increasingly aggressive attempts to control your grandmother's finances and medical decisions. Including this one from October 20th. He fast-forwarded to another file. Marcus's voice again, but this time angry. I don't care what Jessica thinks about your medications. I'm your healthcare proxy, which means my decisions override hers. If I say you need to be evaluated for memory problems, that's what's happening. October 20th was 3 days ago. 5 days after Marcus had already lost his healthcare proxy status, though he clearly didn't know it yet. The most interesting recording, David said, pulling up another file, is from your family dinner last Sunday. This time it was Sarah's voice, clearer than it should have been if the recorder was just sitting on a table. Marcus, are you sure your grandmother can't hear us out here? We're discussing her like she's not even. The voice faded as if she'd moved away from the recording device. Then Marcus, she naps every Sunday afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock. We have at least an hour to finalize the Meadowbrook timeline and figure out the house listing strategy. Grandma, I whispered, staring at her in amazement, you weren't napping last Sunday. You were listening to them plan your entire future. The hearing aid I got last month has some very interesting features, she said with satisfaction. Including a wireless recording function that streams directly to that little device. Very high-tech. Your grandfather would have been fascinated. David leaned forward. Mrs. Delacroix has 47 recordings proving that Marcus has been systematically working to undermine her autonomy while lying about his legal authority. The recordings also document his plans to sell her property without consent and his false statements about her mental capacity. But Marcus called this morning, I said, explaining his threats about elder abuse charges and legal malpractice claims. He sounded confident that he could get everything overturned. I'm sure he did, David said dryly. Marcus consulted with Robert Brennan this morning, excellent attorney, but he specializes in corporate law. I doubt Mr. Brennan fully understood the scope of documentation we've assembled. He pulled out another thick folder. Financial records showing Marcus attempted to add himself to your grandmother's checking account without her knowledge. Medical records proving she's been competently managing her own healthcare decisions. Phone records showing he's been calling her doctors and attempting to obtain confidential information by claiming healthcare proxy authority he didn't possess. Plus, Grandma Rose added cheerfully, there's the small matter of insurance fraud. My head was spinning. What insurance fraud? David pulled out a form with Marcus's signature. Your brother submitted a long-term care insurance claim on October 18th, requesting pre-authorization for your grandmother's admission to Meadowbrook Manor. He claimed she was suffering from moderate dementia and required full-time supervision. But that's 3 days after she'd already revoked his authority, I realized. Exactly. He filed an insurance claim using fraudulent medical power of attorney, requesting $4,200 per month in benefits for a condition your grandmother doesn't have. David's expression was grim. Insurance fraud is a felony in Pennsylvania. The penalties start at 5 years in prison. The room felt like it was spinning. In less than 24 hours, Marcus had gone from trying to inherit a house to potentially facing federal charges. David, Grandma Rose said, I think it's time we called Marcus back. David dialed Marcus's number on speakerphone, his expression professionally neutral as we waited through 3 rings. When Marcus finally answered, his voice carried that same artificially calm tone he'd used with me that morning. David Chen's office, I assume. Robert Brennan said you might be calling. Mr. Delacroix, this is David Chen representing your grandmother, Rose Delacroix. I understand you have some concerns about recent legal documents. That's putting it mildly, Marcus said, his composure already starting to crack. Your client has been manipulated into making irrational financial decisions by someone with a clear conflict of interest. I'm prepared to file for emergency guardianship based on elder abuse and financial exploitation. David made a note on his legal pad. Before you proceed with that course of action, Mr. Delacroix, I think you should be aware that we have some concerns about your own conduct. Specifically, your October 18th submission to Aetna long-term care insurance. The silence on the other end stretched so long I wondered if Marcus had hung up. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus finally said, but his voice had gone tight. Policy number LTC 44718829, claim reference number 18, CC 9847. You submitted a pre-authorization request for $4,200 monthly benefits for Rose Delacroix's admission to Meadowbrook Manor's memory care unit. You signed as her healthcare proxy and indicated she suffers from moderate dementia requiring full-time supervision. That was preliminary planning. I never said the claim was active. Actually, Mr. Delacroix, when you submit a pre-authorization request with your signature claiming legal authority, that constitutes an active insurance claim. Aetna has already approved the benefit payments based on your representations. David's voice remained maddeningly calm. Unfortunately, you submitted this claim 3 days after your healthcare proxy authority was legally revoked. I watched Grandma Rose lean forward slightly, her eyes bright with interest as she listened to her grandson dig himself deeper. Look, there might have been some confusion about dates, Marcus said, his carefully controlled tone starting to fray. But my grandmother clearly isn't competent to make these kinds of decisions. Have you seen the property transfer? She gave away a $500,000 house to someone who's been isolating her from her family. Interesting theory, David said, pulling out the digital recorder. Would you like to hear your own voice from October 20th discussing your plans to have Mrs. Delacroix evaluated for memory problems specifically so you could override her medical decisions? He pressed play, and Marcus's voice filled the office. I don't care what Jessica thinks about your medications. I'm your healthcare proxy, which means my decisions override hers. If I say you need to be evaluated for memory problems, that's what's happening. The silence that followed was deafening. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was barely controlled rage. You recorded me. Without my consent. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state, David replied smoothly. Mrs. Delacroix was legally entitled to record conversations in her own home. We have 47 such recordings documenting your attempts to usurp her financial and medical autonomy. This is entrapment. You can't use illegal surveillance to. Mr. Delacroix, David interrupted, I need to inform you that we've already forwarded copies of your insurance submission to both Aetna's Fraud Investigation Unit and the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. Insurance fraud involving false medical claims is prosecuted quite aggressively in this state. The phone went dead. Marcus had hung up, but somehow that felt more ominous than if he'd kept yelling. Grandma Rose looked at David with something approaching admiration. How long before we hear from him again? 24 hours, David said confidently. 48 at the outside. Robert Brennan is going to explain to him exactly how much legal trouble he's facing, and Marcus is going to realize he needs this problem to disappear quietly. I stared at both of them, realizing that while I've been worrying about Marcus's threats, they've been systematically building a case that could send him to prison. What happens now? I asked. Grandma Rose smiled. Now we wait for Marcus to call back and negotiate his surrender. David was right. Marcus called back exactly 18 hours later. I was at Grandma Rose's house doing her weekly medication sorting when the phone rang. She gestured for me to answer, her eyes twinkling with anticipation. Jessica, Marcus's voice was hollow, completely different from the aggressive man who'd hung up yesterday. I need to speak with Grandma Rose. She's right here, I said, putting him on speaker. Grandma. His voice cracked slightly. I think there's been a misunderstanding about everything that's happened. Oh. Grandma Rose settled back in her chair like she was preparing to enjoy a particularly good television program. I never meant for any of this to get so complicated. I was just trying to help, to make sure you were taken care of properly. Maybe I was overzealous, but my intentions were good. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the entitled grandson demanding his inheritance. In his place was someone who sounded genuinely desperate. Robert Brennan explained some things to me yesterday, Marcus continued. About the insurance situation, about the recordings. I realize how some of my actions might have been misinterpreted. Misinterpreted? Grandma Rose's voice was dangerously sweet. Marcus, dear, which part was misinterpreted? The part where you lied to Meadowbrook about my mental capacity, or the part where you filed fraudulent insurance claims, or the part where you planned to sell my house without my permission? I never filed anything fraudulent. The insurance pre-authorization was just preliminary research. I was trying to understand what options were available if you ever needed care. On October 18th, 3 days after you'd lost legal authority to make any medical decisions on my behalf, she replied calmly. Using a healthcare proxy you knew was no longer valid. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up again. What do you want? Marcus finally whispered. I want you to listen very carefully, Grandma Rose said, leaning forward. David Chen is going to send you a document. It's called a quitclaim deed waiver. You're going to sign it, acknowledging that you have no legal claim to this property and that you will not contest my decision to transfer ownership to Jessica. And if I don't? Then Monday morning, the Pennsylvania Attorney General receives 47 audio recordings, fraudulent insurance documents, and a very detailed timeline of your attempts to gain illegal control over an elderly person's assets. Her voice hardened. How do you think that insurance fraud investigation will affect your career at Morrison and Associates? What will Sarah's parents think when they read about it in the newspaper? I heard Marcus make a sound that might have been a sob. You're also going to call Edna and withdraw your pre-authorization request, Grandma Rose continued. You'll explain that it was submitted in error, without proper authority. And you're going to apologize to Meadowbrook Manor for wasting their time with a fraudulent application. Grandma, please. I'm not finished. You're going to call every family member you've spoken to about my supposed mental decline and explain that you were mistaken. That I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs and making my own decisions about my property. The family will never forgive me, Marcus said, his voice breaking. The family might forgive you, Marcus. But they'll never trust you the same way again. And that's a consequence you're going to have to live with. Grandma Rose's voice softened just slightly. You could have inherited this house eventually, you know. If you'd just been patient. If you cared about me instead of my bank account. I did care about you. No, Marcus. You cared about what I represented to your financial future. There's a difference. 3 days later, I was sitting at that same kitchen table, legally and officially the owner of a 1940s colonial worth $455,000. The quitclaim waiver had arrived by courier yesterday, signed in Marcus's familiar handwriting. The insurance company had confirmed the withdrawal of his fraudulent pre-authorization. Meadowbrook Manor had received his written apology and removed Grandma Rose from their admission list. So what happens now? I asked, still struggling to believe it was real. Now you decide what you want to do with your house, Grandma Rose said, sipping her evening tea. Though I hope you'll let an old lady stay on as your tenant for a while longer. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. I think I can manage below market rent for a very special tenant. Good. Because I'm not quite ready for Meadowbrook Manor yet. She smiled, the same sharp, satisfied expression she'd worn while dismantling Marcus's schemes. Besides, someone needs to be here when he comes around to apologize properly. You think he will? Oh, I know he will. Marcus can't stand the thought of people thinking poorly of him. Give it 2 weeks, and he'll be here with flowers and some story about how stress made him behave badly. She was right, of course. She'd been right about everything. Grandma Rose? I said, looking around the kitchen that was somehow mine now. Thank you. For trusting me with this. Thank you for showing me what family really means, she replied. It's not about who expects to inherit what. It's about who shows up when you need them. Outside, the autumn evening was settling into darkness, but inside our kitchen, mine and Grandma Rose's, the lights were warm and bright, and for the first time in months, everything felt exactly as it should be. The house was mine. But more importantly, the family I'd chosen was mine too. And Marcus? Well, Marcus learned that sometimes when you count your chickens before they hatch, you end up with nothing but a handful of broken eggshells and a very expensive lesson about what family actually means.